We have one more panelist. Amara Tabor Smith is with us, a choreographer, dancer, teacher, cook, who's going to share a little bit about work that she developed in residency, or that started in residency here in 2008-2009, winter artist in residence, and then she was selected to continue that residency, and so she's continued to develop the work this past year. The work is called Our Daily Bread, and it was April that just had fantabulously successful run of shows here at Counterpulse. In 2006, Amara started her company Deep Waters Dance Theater, and she's the co-founder of Headmistress, an ongoing collaboration with movement artist Sherwood Chen. And she's going to speak a bit about the work and the future of the work as well.
But first I'm going to feed you. So you're actually going to get up in a moment. We're going to make a slight transition. We're going to bring some food out, and then like dignified people, you're going to get in the line and get some food, and I'm going to talk to you as we do that. So hang tight. Let me check on the food. Is everybody hungry? Are you hungry enough to eat some? You have to have some, just a little bit. Oh, well, let me say this. While it's coming out, let's see. First of all, the main course is vegan. The cornbread is not. It's got dairy, and just get that little housekeeping thing out of the way for those of you who are vegan, and this is the Bay Area and all that good stuff. So I'm going to start out. Oh, so get up and get some food. Yeah, I can talk while you're doing things, really, and I can talk loud. Oh, you want to serve people? Okay, great. Okay, this is even better. This is my favorite thing. Actually, usually, thank you, Ellen. That's Ellen Sebastian Chang, who was a collaborator on my piece, phenomenal director and collaborator on Our Daily Bread. And so I do not make work about food necessarily. I made a piece about food. And it was transformative for me. But I'll start by talking about what was the inspiration for me to do this piece. So I do a lot of work that's, as Ellen would say, is issue-based, rooted in social justice, environment, spirituality, culture, race, and so forth. And so the food piece actually, so most of my pieces are very narrative. That's the place that I'm a storyteller through my work, or I like to think so. And this piece came out of a conversation I had with my mother. And I'm going to pull up a chair. Let me get closer. So a few years ago, I grew up, and my mother used to make gumbo. That was my dish growing up. It was like, Mom's gumbo for my birthday, for all special occasions, and any occasion in between. And I have a longing and a very deep attachment to gumbo. My mother makes seafood gumbo. She says if it has anything else in it, it's not gumbo. And a statement like that is very typical of somebody who makes gumbo. And other people feel really differently. They put sausage and whatnot. I'm going to go off on tangents, so don't mind me. But so this conversation with my mother around gumbo came up. She was in the process of making some gumbo, and I became vegan. Oh, it's been a long time now, but I always made exceptions for my mother's gumbo. Because it's sacred and it's so important to me. But I started thinking about, well, you know, we were in this conversation like, what does it mean to have a food tradition that you don't partake in anymore? That, you know, and you don't know how to make. And there was something wrong about that, but I thought, but if I'm not eating this, why am I making it? You know, it's just questions that I was having about what does it mean to carry on these traditions that you're not really, you know, it's not part of your diet. So I started to really think about why was gumbo so important. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to sort of take a pause and tell you what you're getting served up real quick, because there's a link to the gumbo a little bit. This is Jamaican coconut cornbread. In the bowls is, there's rice and there's black-eyed peas and greens. And it's a dish I created for the show because it combines the greens and the black-eyed peas together, because usually you make them separate. But I'll tell you that story in a minute. Anyway, so talking about the gumbo, basically what came up for me was that I realized that gumbo was the one thing that connected me to my Louisiana heritage. My mother's people are from Louisiana. She was not born there. Her parents were born in Louisiana. But she was born in LA, and we never really went to Louisiana when I was growing up. In fact, I never even went for the first time till I was an adult. But the thing that connected me to that heritage that I feel really proud about, this place that I hadn't really experienced, was the gumbo. And then the first time I went to Louisiana and spent time there, yes, and there's hot sauce, there's Tabasco if you want hot sauce in your black-eyed peas. It felt like a place that I wasn't familiar with except for the food. And I was like, oh, I know this, And my grandmother used to make jambalaya, so I was familiar, I felt like I know Louisiana because I know the food. So I really started to recognize that food is what connected me to my Louisiana heritage. So that was a little bit of a revelation for me. And then I started thinking about it and getting to the black-eyed peas. My father was born and raised in Memphis, but once he left, he did not go back. And I never went there until I was an adult. I had never been we didn't go as kids to visit our family. Most of his family was gone by the time I was born. But what connected me to my roots in the South through my father was the tradition of making black-eyed peas, greens, and cornbread on New Year's Day. And that's a huge tradition in the African-American community. It's like what you do for good luck. You don't start a New Year's without these things, and I grew up with that, and that's what connected me. So all of that storytelling is to say that what brought me to this piece, making this piece about food, was about, how food shapes our cultural identity. And so I thought, well, how am I going to make a dance about this? But what I decided to do was start with, delving deeper into my own, asking questions of my own family, but then asking other people. And so the whole journey of making the piece, getting to the whole thing around community engagement. Community engagement is a process, or it was an experience of generating information about a topic that I had the experience with Urban Bushwomen, a dance company based in New York, and Jacqueline Willa Jo Zoller is rooted in community engagement in terms of her work as a choreographer. So having come from that background, I was really just continuing on in that with that legacy to delve into to the making of this work. So over the past couple of years, it's been a process of having, basically, I love to cook and I love to sit and eat with people. And what I realize in the process is, like, if you feed people, one, people relax. It's really hard to be tense when you're eating. You just want to relax and just take in. And if the food's real good, then, usually people will tell you anything. And I actually think it's, how they should replace torture. If you would feed people really good, you get all the information. I actually believe this. I'm really serious. It's like deprivation, and I want to get on that. Deprivation is something I want to address in terms of dance in a minute. But so the process of having the food parties was about bringing people together in various circumstances. So over the period of the last year and a half, 2 years developing this work, I was holding a series of food parties that some happened here at Counterpulse, some happened in people's homes, Some happen in, I did a few food parties in a nightclub at night in Oakland, food parties on the street, food parties in the lobby of dance studios, after classes, feeding dancers, and then just asking them to tell me. I would just feed them, and I'd say, you know, everybody was always like, oh, is this free? I said, yeah, but I want you to tell me a story about the food you grew up with. And so we would start having these dialogues about food, and some of them were set, like some of the food parties would happen and have certain themes. But the whole point was for people to come together, number one, to eat together, because I felt like this was another piece that was missing that's just missing in general in our current sort of society. So that was how, basically, that was the road to get to this work that has become our daily bread. But within that is that, you know, the intersection of food and dance was not foreign to me. Culturally speaking, this is something that happens naturally in my background. You know, coming up as a little kid, taking dance classes, just, you know, recreationally, you know, there was always food. There's always food in the African American community. There's always food related to most things, whether it's church, whether it's music. There's just the idea of people are eating on multiple levels, are being fed on multiple levels. So this intersection of art and food was not new. But I realized more recently that that disconnect really happened once I started training formally as a dancer in sort of the Western training, because the idea of food and dance is like, you know, you don't eat. In fact, there was a whole lot of deprivation. Like, what was revered was the ones who would go without eating. And so this became this whole, and then I remember as a young dancer thinking, oh yeah, I want to be skinny because that's the mode. You know, that was what I was seeing as being what was held in high esteem. And that had to do with a lot of deprivation of food. And deprivation on many levels, you know. You don't have enough money, you don't have enough food, you know, you don't have enough sleep. You're a hungry dancer. And that, you know, and even hearing that from choreographers, like, I'm looking for somebody who's hungry for it. And there's something about that was like, oh yeah, there's something about this that's all wrong. So, and then I'll tell you a short other stories where I started to come back to food was when I began working with urban bushwomen, and we would eat on our lunch breaks. And I remember rehearsing in New York in this building where a lot of different dance companies did. And I remember we were rehearsing at the same time as Twyla Tharp's company. And I remember on our lunch break, we went down to the deli and all of us dancers came back and we had, like, you know, we had all the food, we had all this food. And I remember their dancers taking the lunch break at the same time, and everybody had cigarettes and Diet Pepsi. And I thought, this is wrong, this is deprivation, you know? But this is what we were holding up in high esteem. So these were sort of the through lines that were guiding me in this process of making this piece, was that food is, it's part of our survival. And the intersection of art and food, for me, is not a new thing. Ellen, who's in the kitchen, was doing work, oh God, 1982, she did this piece called Your Place Is No Longer With Us, which was where it happened in a house, and the audience walked through the house, and they were following a little girl who was in her grandmother's house. And the first contact you had when you walked in was the smell of cooking food. It was greens, and it was black-eyed
cornbread.
Yes, so the staple, you know. But the thing about it is that, you know, one thing that Ellen has even said to me is that I think right now the intersection of food and art is just, it seems to be happening a lot, but I think it's always been happening, but now we're paying closer attention to it because we're in a crisis. And we're in a crisis around our food. And anytime, you know, it's just like a few years ago it was water. Not that water is not a crisis anymore, but it's like you start to really notice the thing that is foremost on your plate, and friend, or what you're, you know, what you're hearing about. Let's see. I had another point to make. Do I need to wrap it up? You just let me know. I have a little section of, yes?
No, you're okay for 3 more minutes.
3 more minutes? Okay. 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 So my point, I guess, is now, you know, the intersection. The one other thing that became clear to me too in the process of making this work was that I was really trying to reach out to a lot of community activists who are doing work around food. They really didn't get it. They were like, you're a choreographer, what? You're gonna make a dance about food? Okay, that sounds really groovy, whatever, I don't have time for that. Because it did, it sounded like this very lofty, oh, you know, I wanna do something about food, and to them that was like, no, we're doing serious work here, so you take your little dance thing. Nobody ever really said that to me, but the feeling was like there wasn't time for it, and I understood it. Because it's like, right, there's got to be a way to, you know, it's a lofty idea. It's like Melissa was saying, you know, when she tells people she does work about food as a choreographer, it's like, food and dance, what is that all about? When you speak about it in a conscious way, when you're saying, I do a piece about food and dance, it becomes this thing that you can't imagine. Whereas if you were to have dance and have some food there, it would be totally, you know, received and acceptable, and people wouldn't think twice. But when we're becoming really aware about how we're doing this work together, it suddenly becomes this strange thing. But what was interesting with so I had to get in, you know, I wanted to get information, I wanted to engage with these activists who are doing this really important work in communities around food and sustainability. So I went and I fed them. So I would show up, so in particular, I remember showing up to People's Grocery in Oakland, and I was like, I want to cook for you, and I want to cook lunch for you all. And so I started doing that on a regular basis, and then it was like, we started talking about food, and they said, well, what is this thing you're doing? And so then it was little by little, and then they asked us to do something for their benefit, and then it was like, oh, I get it. But food becomes this road in, and I was able to feed them to get them to come to the dance. And then there's this way that food is, you know, a lot of my audience who hadn't really experienced dance before were brought in by the food. You know, the idea of it may not have been attractive in and of itself, but I was feeding them, and that's how I kind of got them in. It's like these sayings, you know, the way to a man's heart is through his stomach, and I felt like the way to my audience's heart was through their stomach. But the power of it was that it was my way. This piece was the first time that I was really able to connect with the audience, that it really wasn't about, I'm doing a performance for you, but you're in my house. You came over to have dinner. And so from the minute people walked into the doors, it was about home. And that was the way I was able to tell my story, and I think for it to be digested. The last thing I want to say about it is that in my research, I went a lot of different places, and one place that really changed a lot for me was when I went to Senegal, and I was studying dance, but we stopped and we ate 3 meals a day. It was like everything stopped, you know, you dance, you dance, and then it's like, okay, it's lunch. Lunch, oh, we stop. And then we stopped for a long time, and you're sitting at a big plate on the floor, and everybody's eating from the same plate, and you're eating together. And this was something that I had to bring back with me in my rehearsal process. And so it became part of our rehearsal process. It was like, oh, it's 2:30, we have to stop dancing. And it didn't matter that what the work was in chaos. And I'm like, oh my God, we need to rehearse more. It's like, no, we need to stop and eat. Because if we don't do that, then we're not telling the truth in the piece. And so that was the road that brought me to this work around food in my choreography, and has been transformative. The power of food in art doesn't have to be about, you don't have to make a dance about food, but just this idea that, to break bread together in some way is really the divide for me between the audience and the art is over. I'm not interested in that anymore in my own work. Like, how can I feed you? So I was going to show you a little excerpt from the piece, but we don't have to do that. And I'll just keep it at there. Thank you.
Fabulous. Do you feel fed? Yes? Yeah.